In the Olivet prophecy, there are three parables, three connected parables that you're quite familiar with them, I think. They are the parable of the 10 virgins, where there were 5 wise virgins and 5 foolish virgins. It's followed by the parable of the talents, where one man is given 5, another man is given 2, another man is given 1. It's followed by the parable of the sheep and goats, where separates the sheep and the goats and puts the sheep on the one hand and the goats on the other hand. All of us are, I think, quite familiar with the parables. But we may not realize how they are connected, beyond the fact that they are given in response to the question the disciples asked about the end of the age, when they said, when shall all these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming into the end of the age? And he gave them a long prophecy, and he closed it off with these 3 parables. Now, the 3 parables, take a look at the first one in Matthew 25, verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven is like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. 5 were wise, 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took oil in their lamps, but with them. The wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. And this seems to be the only difference between them. One group took their lamps and took oil with them. The other group took their lamps, but took oil with them. 5 wise, 5 foolish. The parable is incredibly simple. At midnight, there was a cry made. They had all slumbered and slept, so there's nothing in the fact that some of them were sleepy and some of them were wakeful. At midnight, there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom comes, go out to meet him. All those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. But the foolish said to the wise, give us of your oil, our lamps are going out. The wise answered, saying, not so, lest there be not enough for us and for you. You go to them that sell, and buy some for yourself. While they went to buy, the bridegroom came. They that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came, saying, Lord, open to us. And he answered and said, verily I say unto you, I don't know you. Now there's a very important concept to be understood here. It is the connection between the 3 parables. I mean, you can draw lessons until the cows come home from these parables. I've heard so many sermonettes and sermons over the years from each of them, drawing this analogy, drawing that lesson, and all of them quite valid. My question, though, is how are they connected? One of the most important things for you to notice about this parable is the reason why these people were shut out. It was not because of anything they had done. It was because of something they had not done. Now, generally speaking, when we think about people incurring the wrath of God, going to hell, or being punished, or chastised, or whatever it is that we think happens to evil or wicked people, we generally think in terms that they suffer because of something they have done. In other words, they went chasing after women every Saturday night, or they got drunk and came home and beat up the wife and the children, or the guy stole from his boss at work, or he stuck up a convenience store, or he committed one crime or another, or one violation of the 10 Commandments after another, and because he was a sinner, that is, he broke the law, he went to hell, or he was punished by God, or whatever it is that happens. But here, these people are shut out of the presence of God, not because of what they did, but because of what they did not do. Now, the second parable is like it in that way. It says in verse 14, the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling in a far country, who called his servants and delivered to them his goods. He gave one man 5, he gave another man 2, he gave the third one 1. And he went on his way, and he traveled around, and while he was gone, the men he had left behind carried on. And the one that he had given 5 talents to, we are told, went and traded with it and gained 5 additional talents. Now, I don't know what he did, but presumably he got on his camel and went down the road a little ways and bought some goods, perhaps some textiles. And he then brought them back to a place where they sold for a higher price and got more money for them and took that money and went and bought some more and came back. And finally, when his master came back, he found that as a result of his work and his trading and his accomplishments, he had actually doubled his money. And he came to him and he said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. I've gained 5 talents more. Here they are. His answer was, well done, you good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then came the man that had received 2 talents, and he had done something quite similar. He had taken the 2 talents, and he'd gone and traded with them. And he had, again, doubled his master's money. We don't know what risks he took. We don't know what he bought, what he sold. But they made the money work. And when the master came back, he came in and said, Lord, you gave me 2 talents. I've got 4 for you. And gave them to him. And he said, well, enter into the joy of your Lord. And then finally comes the story of this last man. Verse 24. He that had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew that you were a hard man. In other words, I was afraid of you. You know that you reap where you haven't sown and gathered where you have not strawed. I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the earth, and lo, you have there what is yours. Now, the thing that's always struck me about this parable is that the man didn't lose anything. He didn't take the parable and go gamble with it. He didn't spend it on himself or his mistress. He didn't just waste the money and then came back and said, Lord, I'm sorry, I spent the money you gave me. He still had it. He hadn't lost it. He hadn't wasted it. And he came and said, here, you have what is yours. His Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I don't sow. You knew that I gather where I have not strawed. You ought to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I would have at least received my own with interest. He knew the time value of money. There would have been something here. He said, take the talent from him that has it, and give it to him that has 10. For to everyone that has shall be given, he shall have abundance. But from him that has not, it will be taken away even what he has. Cast you the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Do you see the connection? This man was cast into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. The 5 virgins were blocked out from the presence of the Lamb. Whatever punishment you wish to imagine that God might give to people, it seems to happen to them not because of what they did, but because of what they did not do. The message in both these parables is identical, isn't it? Notice what he says. You wicked and slothful servant. You lazy lout. You did not even have the thought. You didn't even give it the consideration to sit there for a moment and hold it in your hand and even ask, what shall I do with this? How can I make it grow? You did not even walk down and put it into a risk-free investment. If you had just gone and given it to the exchangers, when I came back, I would have got it back, and there would have been some small gain, maybe 8%. Maybe it would have been 15%, but there would have been something. He says, you lazy lout. The thing that these people all got in trouble with God for was sloth. The 5 foolish virgins were slothful. They had been too lazy to take the additional step of being sure that they had some additional oil in their lamps, something they could have reasonably been expected to do because 5 others did it, right? And so they were condemned, not because of what they had done, but because of what they did not do. The severity of God's response upon people for negligence is surprising, unless you already have a clue as to how his mind works. This connection that we find in these parables is one of what people have come to call the 7 deadly sins. It is sloth. What is sloth? Well, sloth is a habitual response to life's situations. It influences the way we do everything. It is the way we think. It has to do with the way we respond to situations that come up. It is sometimes a little hard for us to understand, but I want you to turn back to Proverbs chapter 24 so we can maybe understand just briefly what is sloth and what does the Bible mean by it. Proverbs chapter 24 and verse 30. He says in verse 30, I went by the field of the slothful, and the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face of it. This is a simple concept. Nothing really difficult to understand. We want to know what God means when he talks about sloth. Here we are, the slothful man, the man void of understanding. And I walked by his place. And he's got a vineyard there where he normally, in years gone by, his father, at least before him, had planted vines, and normally there were grapes to be grown. And I walked by it, and I noticed that it was all covered up with thorns, and nettles had grown all over everything that was there. The message is really very simple. It is going to be the natural state of a garden, a vineyard, or any agricultural effort of man to go back to weeds, thorns, and nettles, right? We all know that. Many of us have tried gardens in the past, and because we were a little too lazy to keep them up like we should, we know just exactly what happens when you don't maintain them. The truth of the matter is that in very small ways, every day of your life, that these little projects like gardens we have got to be tended to systematically and consistently over time. You have got to go out and pay attention to your vineyard. You have got to notice the first thorn beginning to grow up, and you've got to pull it out of the ground. Once you let them get ahead of you, the job becomes simply overwhelming, and lots of times you'll just give up when it gets too far gone. You have got to get the first weed, or at least the first 2 or 3 weeds. You have got to be on top of that situation, or it'll be gone. I walked by, and sure enough, he had not taken care of the simple little things of his garden. The habitual response to him in his life was simply to let it go. Just let it happen. And he says, and also, the stone wall thereof was broken down. Now, I don't know how it works exactly, and I'm not sure I altogether understand it, but it seems to be true that almost anything built by man will slowly decay. You know, you'd think a rock wall was pretty permanent, wouldn't you? I mean, you've gone to the trouble to gather up rocks, and you've got your basin up, and you've made mortar, and you put the rocks down there, or your dad did, or somebody did, and they build this rock wall up. And you go away and leave it, you would think that this wall would just stand there and be there forever because the thing's made out of rock and mortar. But somehow or other, in the process of the passing of time, even a stone wall will finally begin to break down, won't it? There is a universal law. Scientists refer to it as entropy, which basically means things that are warm tend to cool down. Things that are wound up tend to run down. And the fact of the matter is that everything in our universe, from the human body to the earth to the sun, all are winding down. Everything goes down. It's the way things are in the universe. And it takes effort, it takes work, it takes struggle to make anything go up. Stone walls finally break down. Houses finally go to rack and ruin. He said, I went by and I saw that this man had not seen to and taken care of his wall. A man who is not slothful, when he's out looking at his fields and pulling up a thorn here and there, notices, well, there's a piece of rock that's fallen off my wall over there. We'll go make himself a little bit of mortar. We'll go to the wall, put it down there, put the rock back in place, and he will maintain and repair his wall over time. And the wall never does decay to the point to where it's not worth it to fix it up, or where the job is overwhelming and it never gets away from him, but it never gets away from him. Because consistently, day in, day out, he struggles against entropy. That is, against decay, against gravity, against the destructive forces of nature, of wind and water, that finally do tend to tear everything down and wear it out. He said it was all grown over, and the stone wall was broken down. And I saw, and I considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. Then your poverty shall come as one that travels, and your want like an armed man. Sooner or later, if you continue to neglect those things that have been put in your care, it's going to take you all the way to poverty and to want. There's an interesting comparison in Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 18. It says, by much slothfulness the building decays, and through idleness in the hands the house drops through. Oh, how true it is. I mean, I can walk through my house and look from place to place. You know, there are only 2 of us in our house. And we don't give our house a lot of wear. But the fact of the matter is that without us touching anything, over time, you notice cracks begin to occur between joints that were made in the trim that you put around the house. Nobody got up there and pulled or tugged on it. All of a sudden there's a crack in it that wasn't there before. And you go somewhere and you slam a door repeatedly, and you notice over time that maybe the doors beginning to, where the wallpaper was put on the door tends to crack and pull just a little bit. And that's something that has to be taken care of. And as you walk around your house, you will see one thing here and another thing there and another thing there that are slowly decaying. He makes it clear, through slothfulness, the building decays. It runs down. You ever think about this? You're driving along the country road and you see this shack out here that is, nobody's living in it anymore, and the thing is going to rack and ruin. You ever think about the fact that once upon a time that shack was new? Brand new. Just been put up. Everything was in place. All the nails were still in. All the roof was still there. It didn't leak. The windows were in place. And the wind blowed. It was still reasonably warm inside. The stove was there, and the pipe went through the roof, and you could build a fire. One time that cabin was new. You drive through some of these little old East Texas towns, and as you come along, you'll see a kind of a new business area. Then you'll drive through an old business area. And there are old brick buildings. The bricks have fallen off of, and you got a broken window here, and the upper stories, the windows are all sort of turning in color as the building just gets older. You look at those and think, once upon a time, that building was brand new. It was the pride of somebody, and it was very impressive in its time and its place and its circumstance. But you can build a brand new building, and you can walk away from it and come back 50 years later, and the thing will have gone to rack and ruin without anybody even touching it. Things do decay. They don't just wear out. The lesson, I think, is a very strong one, and that is that you see the evidence of sloth in the natural decay that goes on in our environment from a lack of attention to details. And you can see it in your own life fairly readily, too. I don't have very far to go in mine. I can walk down to my study, and I can see classic illustrations of entropy there. It comes from things like taking a book down in the process of doing sermon preparation, paging through to find what I want, making a note on it, and then just laying the book down on the cabinet top and going to get another book. Going into a file and pulling out a piece of paper and working with that piece of paper and laying it down on the cabinet top and not putting it back where I got it before. It doesn't seem to take any time at all, and you're not even aware of it. There are times when you probably feel like, who came in here and messed up my room? Because you're not aware of the things that you do. When you take things down and don't put them away, you put a book down and don't put it back. You look at a piece of paper and you don't deal with it. You put it down saying, I'll take care of that after I've done some other things. My desk at my office can slowly begin to silt up with paper. First of all, it's only 2 or 3 sheets deep. And then it's a quarter of an inch deep. And then it's an inch deep. And then it's 2 inches deep. And it just begins to keep on going up. Now, I can excuse myself and all kinds of excuses, but the fact of the matter is, I have not learned one of the simplest principles that a lot of mechanics learn when they're learning their craft. When you pick up a tool and you use the tool and you're through with the tool, you put the tool back in its place. Now, I know the wisdom of that, but nobody ever taught me that habit. So I'm working around my garage and I grab a tool and I go do something with something and I get distracted or the phone rings and I lay the tool down. Then I come back later on and I say, let's see, I need that screwdriver. Where did I put it? Any of you ever do anything like that? And so you spend all kinds of time wandering around playing this game. We used to play as a kid called I Spy, right? We'd hide the thimble somewhere and it had to be in plain sight. And you'd walk around the room and we'd tell each other we're warm or we're cold, trying to spy this thing that we happen to put down somewhere. It's in plain sight, but you have to find it. You spend so much more time trying to find your tools and find your papers or find your books than you would if you took the time to put them back in the first place. These little failures of habit, and like I said, it is a habitual response to life situations, is not to maintain things, not to take care of things, not to put things away, not to paint things, not to repair things, not to pull up weeds, not to systematically, day in, day out, maintain the world around you. It's called sloth. And it's something that all of us have and all of us live with and all of us are in some ways guilty of. What does sloth produce? Well, Proverbs 10 verse 4 says, he becomes poor who deals with a slack hand. In other words, the person who does not take care of things has a tendency to slowly but surely become poor. On the other hand, it says the hand of the diligent makes rich. He that gathers in summer is a wise son. He that sleeps in harvest causes shame. Two very great contrasts. Normally you don't gather in summer, you gather in harvest. But the truth of the matter is that there are some fruits and some grains that do become available and are ready to be harvested early. Now it says the son that gets out there and gathers while the summer. In other words, as soon as something is ready, he takes care of that so that it's not left over when the other things begin to come in, that he has to do it then. In other words, the early things are taken care of early. So they're not in your way when the middle things come along, and they're not still hanging over your head when the later things come along. This is the good son, it says. On the other hand, the one that is still sleeps in the morning and doesn't get up till 10 o'clock in the time of harvest, when there are 14 hours of work to be done and there are 12 hours between daylight and dark. This son is going to cause shame. It's a simple matter of getting up early and getting at the world and taking care of the tasks, getting on your tasks early rather than letting them wait until late. The results of it is poverty. The cure to it is getting on your tasks early rather than late. That's what this proverb is simply about. Do it now might be a short translation of it. Proverbs 12:1. He that tills his land shall be satisfied with bread, but he that follows vain persons is void of understanding. In other words, the guy that gets out there and gets his spade, goes out and digs up a little garden, or the woman that plants a garden out back of her house, and she takes care of her onions and plants her tomatoes and does all these things, she is actually going to have food to eat, whereas the one that's in there watching Phil Donahue isn't going to have it. It's as simple as that. You're chasing around after this pursuit, that pursuit, or the other pursuit. And basically what it's saying is that there is something productive to do at almost any time. Oh, not that there isn't a time to play and a time to relax, but the time to play and the time to relax comes when? After the work is done, not before. Proverbs 12:24. The hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute. Now, there's a different interesting thing here. Basically, all it's telling you is that the man who gets up and gets to work and the person who's diligent tends to be the one that's going to be in charge, and the one that's lazy tends to be the one that's working for the one that's going to be in charge. Do we all understand that principle? That is so simple and easy to understand. It's amazing to me how anyone could ever miss it. There's a funny thing hidden in this verse, though. It says essentially, the hand of the diligent shall bear root, but the slothful shall be under tribute. There are two words, often translated as sloth, slothful, or slothfulness in the book of Proverbs. One of them has to do with, it just simply means indolence. The other word basically means deceit or treachery, which I thought was curious that they should do it this way. And the translators, because it is set opposite diligence, assume that it means it in the sense of sloth, so they translated it sloth. There is a connection between deceit and sloth. The word here basically is used in that sense. Elsewhere it does mean simply deceit. The hand of the diligent shall bear root, but the deceitful man is going to be under tribute. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means to me. The connection between deceit and sloth is that the person you deceive the most is yourself. We find excuses. We deceive ourselves and give ourselves reasons why we don't do this or do that or get the thing done that needs to be done. There is an enormous amount of self-deception involved in sloth. Proverbs 12, verse 27, the slothful man does not roast that which he took in hunting. Why? Well, because he didn't go. Or when he did go, he wasn't diligent. He didn't get up one hill and down the other and cross this ravine. He didn't look in all the nooks and crannies. He maybe got himself somewhere and sat there hoping that something would come by. The substance, it says, of a diligent man is precious. That means there's a lot of it. Proverbs 13, verse 4. The soul of the sluggard desires and has nothing. The soul of the diligent shall be made fat. In other words, the slothful man wants things he doesn't have, and wants things he's never going to have. I suppose if having things is important to you, you've got your formula right here. Because the fact of the matter is, if you don't take care of things, if you don't tend to things, if you don't rise up early, if you don't take care of your tasks as soon as they can be done rather than putting them off until later, you're not going to be able to have the things that you desire. Proverbs 15:19. The way of the slothful man is a hedge of thorns. The way of the righteous is made plain. Now, I want us to think about that for a moment because the analogy is simple enough. Have you ever tried to get through a hedge, to take a shortcut? Hedge is a tough thing to get through. I mean, even a good old boxwood hedge or something of that nature, because they grow thick, and it's hard to get through them. Now we've got not a hedge, but a hedge of thorns. I don't care how far it is around a hedge of thorns, I guess I'm going to have to go around. The way of a slothful man is a hedge of thorns, whereas the way of a righteous man is a causeway. Actually, it means it's broad causeway, just where you can get up there and whistle on down the road. Now, the interesting thing about this to me is that when you stop and think about it, is that for a person who does not tend to business, a person who does not put his tools away, every job is more difficult, every trip he takes is longer, everything he tries to do takes more time and is harder to do, and is harder on him and harder on his family. In other words, the laziness, the sloth, the carelessness with which we order our affairs makes life much more difficult for us than it otherwise would be. Now, the curious thing about this is that in being lazy, we are trying to avoid difficulty, aren't we? The message of the book of Proverbs is that you are actually making things much more difficult for yourself by sloth. It's simple. It's easy to understand. But boy, is it not. It's much more difficult than that to rectify. Proverbs 18:9. He also that is slothful in his work is a brother to him that's a great waster. Now, the old saying, waste not, want not, comes to mind, and how we have been taught even from the time we were children the importance of not wasting things. As a result, most of us have so much clutter around us in our homes and our houses sometimes that we can't move. We've got too many clothes in the closets, we got too many books on the shelves, we got too many tools here, we got too much junk here, we got a junk box for this and a junk box for that. And finally, you get to the place where you feel like you have to move out and use the place you're living as a storehouse because of all the junk you've got. So we don't want to waste anything. The fact of the matter is, so much of the time, by the clutter in our life, we wind up wasting much more time in trying to straighten out our clutter than we would have ever cost us to go to work and buy it new if we needed it. Sometimes we would be so much better off to throw some of these things away. But the person who is slothful in his work is a brother to the waster, the one who does waste things, throw things away, and doesn't keep things that ought to be kept. Proverbs 19:15, slothfulness casts into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. I was intrigued by the fact, in some of my reading, I noticed that one of the symptoms of depression, and I don't mean clinical depression of the kind you need to go to the hospital for or get treatment for, but one of the signs of depression is a tendency to sleep more than you should. A tendency to sleep in the morning, or a tendency to get sleepy during the day. You just seem to lack energy and don't have the drive to do so many of the things that you might want to do. You know how that works? Slothfulness, he says here, casts into a deep sleep. One of the problems we have as a result of sloth is that life does tend to get on top of us. We get behind in our work. We're not fulfilled in our work. We don't have any feeling of accomplishment through the things that we're doing. As a result, we begin to feel depressed. Self-worth goes down the drain, and when we start feeling depressed and we don't want to face the day, we don't get out of bed in the morning. Slothfulness, according to the book of Proverbs, lies squarely at the root, at the core of much of this stuff we're talking about here. A lot of the mental problems that we have, a lot of the malaise that we have. I think a lot of the anxiety and the struggles that we have are things that come upon us where we are loaded down with guilt because we think we're in trouble for something that we've done. The truth of the matter is, we're feeling guilty about one thing when we really ought to feel guilty about not having worked, not having produced. It's guilt about other parts of our life that causes us sometimes to transfer that guilt to other things. And sloth is the fundamental sin that causes us to give up. Now, we all understand that we shouldn't be quitters, and quitters never, don't win, and the winners don't quit. We all understand all that stuff. But the truth of the matter is that it is slothfulness that causes us to give up. Sloth will cause a person to give up on life. In other words, it's just too much work. It's just too much struggle. I can't face another day. I can't face my critics. I can't face this. I can't face that. And people blow their brains out. People take overdoses of sleeping pills. People drive their cars deliberately in their bridge abutments because life has got on top of them and they just can't find it in themselves to struggle with it one more day. Because after all, it is a struggle. People, because of sloth, give up on marriages. They're just not willing to continue to work at it. They have to face the fact that I'm going to have to make some changes, and the change is going to hurt me. It's going to be a painful thing I have to do. There are some things I have to own up to about myself, and I don't want to face the pain. There are some things I'm going to have to do, and I don't have the energy to do them. I just don't feel like facing it again, and so people get up and walk out of marriages. And a lot of times, it's because of the sin of sloth. We don't necessarily recognize it as that because sloth has all kinds of disguises and presents itself in all manner of ways, and we don't necessarily recognize it when it jumps upon us. What is the character of sloth? What's it like? How do you recognize it? What do you see when you look to it? Proverbs 19:24 is fascinating to me in this regard. It says, "A slothful man hides his hand in his bosom and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again." Now, that's really awkward in the King James translation. The Revised Standard Version is a little bit better. It says essentially, the slothful man puts his hand into the dish and is just too lazy to move the food to his mouth. Now, this is a proverb, and I don't know how literal we want to take it, but the message is one: this guy is so tired that he can't even feed himself. Now, I have no doubt that a great deal of the problems that people suffer in this life has to do with health. They don't eat right, they don't take care of themselves, they don't get enough sleep, and because of dietary problems or deficiencies, they don't have energy to face life's problems and so forth. I have no doubt that that is true. Nor do I have any doubt that many times the reasons why we have so little energy, so little drive, so little of what it takes to do things is because we have lost the will to do. And we've lost the will to do because of inactivity. You know what happens when you don't exercise, don't you? You get weak. Do you have any idea how that's going to fall out in other parts of your life when you don't exercise your mind? When you don't apply yourself to the tasks at hand? Whenever you let yourself get behind in your work and you get discouraged and downhearted and then you start feeling bad and the guilt gets on top of you? No one has any idea how much of the physical ailments that we suffer, how many of them, have to do with just this kind of depression brought on by sloth, because we have simply let life get on top of us, and we are no longer willing to make the work, put the work out to do what has to be done. Proverbs 20, verse 4, "The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold. Therefore shall he beg in harvest, and he's not going to have anything." That's an interesting one as well. In other words, here is a task that has to be done. We know it has got to be done. Not only do we know it's got to be done, we know it's got to be done early. But because it's cold and we get up in the morning and we just don't have the energy and we step outside the door and it's just this cold biting wind going through and we say, "I know I've got to plow, I know I've got to get that, but it's just too cold." And we turn around and go back inside. One of the characters, the characteristics of sloth, or what the character of sloth is that we make excuses and we simply are unwilling to take the discomfort or the pain of the hardship for tasks that have to be done. We just don't want to feel discomfort. Now, this is probably worse for us than for any generation that there ever has been on the face of the earth, because we have so many comforts, and we have so many helps, and we've got cars with heaters in them, and we are warm most of the time. In the summertime, we're cool most of the time, so that we don't have to endure discomforts, and sometimes we forget what those discomforts are like. One of the great values for me in years gone by of going and hunting in the autumn up in Colorado was the fact that for one solid week or better, I was not comfortable. And there was no time during that period of time when I was. It was like the man who banged his head against the wall. He said, "Why are you doing this?" He said, "Because it feels so good when I quit." My life doesn't require me to get out and plow in the cold of the morning. I have to find something else to do that requires some effort on my part, some sacrifice, some movement, something or other to do that gets me out of my routine, gets me out of my home. He says, "The sluggard will not plow by reason of the cold." Finds excuses, doesn't want the hardship. He goes on in chapter 20, verse 13. "Love not sleep, lest you come to poverty. Open your eyes, and you'll have plenty of bread." Now, obviously we've got to get a night's sleep. There's a minimum amount we've got to have to get our rest. He's talking about that going beyond sleep, that sleep where we don't seem to be able to get ourselves up, where we use sleep as an excuse, or fatigue as an excuse. Chapter 21, verse 5, the thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteousness, but of everyone that is hasty, only to want. Now, what is interesting in this particular passage to me, and it was very striking when I read it, was it contrasts diligence now with haste. In other words, we get in a hurry, we take on a task, and we do it hastily instead of well. Haste in doing a job, not speed, not real speed, not that, but the carelessness that is begotten by haste, which is in turn begotten by sloth, is what we're talking about here. I'm going to do it fast so I can get it over with, and I do it hastily. I do not do it well. Do you know what our main excuse is for haste? Well, I just don't have enough time. I told my doctor that once, and he got rather impatient with me. He told me that I needed to get more exercise, and I said, well, it takes so much time. And he said, look, he says, you have got as much time in a day as I've got. Both of us have got 24 hours in a day. What you're telling me is that you don't want to take the time for this particular task. And I had to admit it to him, yeah, that really was right. You know what lay at the root of that? Sloth. Because exercise is work. Exercise takes effort. Exercise is often painful. Exercise is not comfortable. Sitting in front of the television is comfortable. Getting there in my chair with my feet up and watching match, I enjoy that. I do not enjoy getting up and doing exercises and push-ups and baking. I do enjoy my walks up to a degree, but all that stuff takes effort. And it's easier to watch television. It's easier to read a book. It's easier to do all kinds of things. That was what I meant, and I said, I don't have enough time. I'll never forget once that the year I graduated from college, that I was walking along campus showing my mother and father around the college campus. And we ran across Herbert Armstrong, who was at the same time also out to enjoy the gardens and take a walk on the campus. And I knew Mr. Armstrong was a busy man. This was at graduation time, and he had more stuff to do than a man would ever have to do and, could get done in a day. But I did want to introduce him to my parents, and I assumed he would shake hands with them, exchange pleasantries, and keep going on his way. I introduced him. He stopped. He focused on them. He stood there and talked to them. He asked them where they had come from. He asked them, he told them that I was one of their, quote, top men, and he was very proud of me and so forth, which I suppose he meant it. I don't know. But I had a feeling he would have told my parents that even if he hadn't meant it. He just took time, and I have never to this day forgotten that he did not deal with this encounter in haste. Haste is a great waster, which is related to sloth. And most of the times we get involved in haste is because we don't want to put forth the effort required to relate to this person, to communicate with this person, to take the time, that's not even the word, but to give of ourselves to this person. We are lazy. Sloth lies at the root of most of the things that we do in haste. Proverbs 21:15. The desire of the slothful kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. That in itself is a rather strange statement, but I think I understand what he means. The very desires that we have will slowly eat away at our life because we are simply not willing to work for them. The slothful man, basically what he's saying is going to die early because of his refusal to go to work to get the things that he wants. And it's almost as though the desires are greater in the slothful man than they are in the man who is diligent. Proverbs 22, verse 13. The slothful man says, there's a lion outside, I'll be slain in the streets. Now that is strange, isn't it? You've got to get out and get to work. Well, look, I heard a lion escape from the zoo over in the next county. Something might happen. Excuses, excuses, excuses. We have more excuses for why we don't do our work. Sloth is the great barrier to decisiveness. We probably lose more, lose out on more, and cause more damage and cause more hurt to ourselves and others by the failure to make decisions than by any decision we ever make. You understand that? We lose more
by our failure to make decisions than by any decision we ever make. Do you know why it is we put off decisions? Why we have such a hard time making decisions? Because once the decision is made, we must implement the decision. Implementing the decision means you've got to do something. And doing something takes effort. And so if I can put off the decision, if I can decide not to decide, as it were, as long as I haven't decided, I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to act. Proverbs, I've already seen this particular one. I just put it in here twice. Proverbs 28:16, the sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason. Well, you see, the sluggard has got an enormous amount of experience. It takes a lot, it's a surprising amount of effort. This may sound like a contradiction to you, but I'll come back to it. It takes a surprising amount of effort, intelligence, and ingenuity to avoid work effectively. It's surprising, but it is so. And of course, the sluggard thinks he knows lots of things and he doesn't know. But he has all kinds of excuses for what he doesn't do. Now, passing on down, what can be done about sloth? I want you to turn back with me this time to Proverbs, the 6th chapter. Chapter 6. I want to be sure I'm in the right place. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Now, the first time I ever read this scripture, I assumed, and I think I marked it, in fact, as an example of zeal or diligence. It's really, being a diligent person. There's an interesting little thing, though. It almost shifts gears on you unless you think about it for a moment. Because the lesson you are supposed to learn from the ant is not merely diligence. It's something more than that. The ant, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provides her meat in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. Think about that. The lesson to be learned from the ant is the ant does not need a guide, an overseer, or a ruler in order to do her necessary work. Do you realize that that is one of the biggest differences between people who are fairly well-to-do or have things in this world and people who don't? Is the ability to work without supervision? To be a self-starter? Well, think about it for a moment. You go out to get a job, you're working on a job with somebody. Okay, there are 10 of you working at this job producing widgets. And the average man working with the machinery involved can produce 10 widgets a day. So we're all turning out 10 widgets a day, and these widgets are going on the market being sold, and we're getting back the value of 10 widgets a day. We're all doing equally well, aren't we? However, let's suppose for a moment that we are really kind of not very effective people. We tend to be a little bit slothful. We take breaks when we shouldn't have, and we don't turn out to work. And so consequently, they have to put somebody there to supervise our work, to correct our mistakes, to show us what to do, to tell us when to start and when to stop, and so forth and other. Now, this person who's going to be supervising us, because he has to watch us all the time, he can't make widgets like we can, or at least not as many as we have, because his job is to watch us make widgets, right? Now, we're still turning out 100 widgets a day because there are 10 of us turning out 10 widgets, but there's one guy supervising us. How does he get paid? How does he get paid? He gets paid out of the widgets you make. It's as simple as that, which means you can't make as much money if you have to be supervised as you can if you don't. Now, this is not a just world or a just society, and it doesn't always work that way, but that's the law, and that's in God's Word, and it works out that way in the long run. That those people who can work without being told what to do can do well. People who have to be told what to do are going to have to give up some of what they produce to the person who has to supervise their work. Sloth, the inability to start yourself, to see to it you're on the work, to see to it you stay to the work, to keep after your job even though there's nobody there watching you do it. That inability to do this is a great cause of poverty. Not the only cause, but a great one. He said, how long will you sleep, sluggard? When will you arise out of your sleep? Get a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. And so shall your poverty come as one that travels, and your want like an armed man. What do you do about sloth? Well, there are other scriptures like Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work, nor device, nor wisdom in the grave where you are going. Whatever particular task you find to do it well. Give it your attention. Take care of it. Don't start things that you're not prepared to finish. And of course, that makes a good excuse, by the way. Well, I'm not sure I'm prepared to finish this thing, so maybe I had better not start it. You can find plenty of excuses. If you don't want that one, you'll find another one. Your heart, your mind, your subconscious, which is inherently, I think, in deeply within us all, there is a streak of laziness, will always find reasons why you don't need to do it. But he says, whatever there is that you find to do, if you're going to do it well, do it with your might, focus your attention on it, finish it, close it up, and put your tools away when all is said and done. There's a need in all of us to begin to develop habits, to be able to overcome sloth, to be able to resist that tendency to let everything around us go down and declutter and to become miserable, to fall into decay, or to get finally trashed out to where we have to move out of it because there's no room for us there anymore. There's another lesson that I think all of us need to learn. Mere busyness is not enough. Activity is not enough. Do you realize that an enormous amount of the activity that we engage in our lives, we engage in order not to do something else? We do a lot of things in order to not have to do something else. Merely because you're doing, merely because you're busy, that doesn't prove anything. For one thing, television is an activity. And there's an illusion that you're doing something when you sit down and watch television. What are you doing? Well, I'm watching television. But why are you watching it? Why are you watching this particular program? Do you really like it? Is it really that important? Have you seen it before? Or are you really watching it? Because if you weren't watching it, you really would have to do something about that laundry that's in there. Are you watching it because if you weren't watching this particular program, you would actually have to get out and weed the garden? Are you watching it because if you weren't watching it, you'd actually have to get down and do some homework? Why are you doing what you're doing? What is oftentimes, I think, understood is that we substitute one activity for another so we won't have to do something else. In Proverbs 24, verse 27, it says, prepare your work without and make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterwards build your house. In other words, there is a priority of tasks. And here we are not even talking about leisure or games or fun. We're talking about two tasks that have to be done. And there might be a tendency to go work on your house because that's I'm seeing something go up and it's kind of enjoyable and I'm having a good time working on my house, and it's a point of pride. Getting out in the field and plowing furrows that are straight down the line and taking care of the weeds in your crop, these things are not maybe as glamorous, and you don't like them as much, you don't enjoy them, and that's maybe the operative word. Well, I don't enjoy that work, I enjoy this work. You can almost take it as a rule of thumb that you ought to do first the work you don't enjoy, and then do the work you enjoy. We have a good, firm biblical basis, as a matter of fact, for doing precisely that. Now, would you turn back once again to Matthew, the 25th chapter, where we started before, because we didn't finish those parables. There is one more parable. When the Son of Man, Matthew 25, verse 31, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he'll separate them one from the other like a shepherd divides sheep from goats. He'll set the sheep on his right hand and the goats on the left. Then shall the king say to them on his right hand, come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. And he then enumerates all of the works that they had done. Now, they then come back and say, well, Lord, we didn't do these things to you. He said, inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these my brethren, you have done it to me. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he says to them, verse 41 on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, I am accustomed to think in terms of this being murderers and liars and cheats and thieves and idolaters and all manner of very wicked and evil people, right? Why were these people in this state? I was hungry, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty. You gave me no drink. Notice he didn't say you stole my food. He didn't say you stole my drink. He said, I was hungry and you didn't give me any. I was thirsty and you didn't give me anything to drink. I was a stranger. You did not take me in. Well, I didn't have to do that. I didn't think I had to take somebody in off the street. I was sick and in prison and you didn't visit me. And they shall answer and say, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison? When did we fail to minister to you? Inasmuch, he said, as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, and the righteous into life eternal. And what is sobering about this, these go away into everlasting punishment, not because of something they did, but because of something they did not do. Now, there are some very sobering lessons in all of this. I think things that all of us might do very well to reflect on. But when you think about this for a little while and you begin to think even about basic theology, about who is God and what is God, and why would God have this attitude toward us down here as human beings? This is not the sermon for me to prove this particular point because we have done this elsewhere. But we have come to understand, and we, by the way, are not the first people that this has ever done, and Herbert Armstrong is the first person I ever heard state it, but I have learned since that the idea did not originate with him and that it's much more widespread than we ever imagined. That what God is doing here on this planet is reproducing himself. That he is in the process, as one writer put it, of making us into himself. That man's destiny is to become God. Now, I did not understand that when I first heard it. It sounded like blasphemy to me because, I've been brought up to believe in a monotheism, a strict, rigid monotheism. There's one God, only one God, nobody else can ever be God. I did not even begin to understand the nature of God, who he is, what he stands for, and what he is doing. Now, when you understand that in the process of all this world around us out here, everything is running down, everything decays, everything rots, and that it takes power for things to go up. It takes light to make things grow. It takes the sun to help create that life. It takes tremendous amounts of energy. It takes intelligence. It takes direction. It takes work to make anything go against that decay. If we are ever to grow, if we are ever to become like God, if we are ever to see him as he is, we cannot get there from here by doing nothing. It is not enough to keep our nose clean. It is not enough not to make mistakes. It is not enough not to take risks and be very careful. The Bible identifies that as sloth. You see, sloth is not merely indolence. Sloth is not merely laziness. Sloth is not merely inertia, where you stay in one place and don't move. Sloth involves the failure to do the right thing. Having done a lot may mean nothing if you were doing all these things to keep from doing the right thing. How many excuses do we find for not doing something as simple as prayer? Well, I've got to clean the house. Well, I've got to get the garden planted this morning. Well, I've got to do this. I've got to take care of this. I've got to do this job. And so we go out and do it. Now, you wouldn't think of this as sloth, would you? Because the one activity, prayer, involves no physical activity at all. It involves humbling yourself before God, maybe getting on your knees in a private place and bowing over a chair or a stool and lifting up your prayers toward God. That's not so hard. But when we neglect that activity and substitute other activities for it, sloth lies at the door. Sloth is actually the failure to do the right thing. There are those theologians who have advanced down through the centuries that they feel that of all the 7 deadly sins, sloth is the worst. Because sloth prevents us from overcoming the rest. It prevents us from fighting and from struggling. It prevents us from working to make our marriages work. It prevents us from working to try to find a reason for living and to make our life worthwhile and to be able to affect the lives of others. Sloth allows us to decay and to rot and to fall into ruin with the buildings and the things that man has built all over this world around us. We finally just go to decay, to wrack, and to ruin. One of the reasons for sloth is simply because we don't want to go to the work, to put out the effort, to sacrifice, to feel the pain that's going to be required to finally become God. May He give us the grace to find something to do and to do it with our might.